All right, then, let's move to our second annual lecture, which is named after Friedrich von Wieser. Friedrich von Wieser belongs to the towering figure of the second generation of the Austrian School of Economics, who produced such scholars as the Nobel Prize laureate F.A. von Hayek. Wieser taught here in Prague for more than a decade, leaving only in 1903 to take over Karl Menger's emptied chair in Vienna. He will always be remembered by economists as the author of the concept of opportunity costs. I'm delighted today to introduce to you the PCPE Wieser Memorial Prize recipient, Professor Svetozar Pejovich. Professor Pejovich, who is Professor Emeritus from Texas A&M University and a Senior Research Fellow of the International Center for Economic Research in Torino, Italy, is an author of 9 books, such as The Fundamentals of Economics, a Property Rights Approach, The Economics of Property Rights Toward a Theory of Comparative Economic Systems, Law, Informal Institutions, and Economic Performance. He authored 5 monographs and hundreds of articles in professional economic journals, including the Journal of Law and Economics, Journal of Economic History, Journal of Economic Literature, Review of Austrian Economics. Pejovich has written extensively in areas of comparative economics, transition, and property rights. He's actually a book and author from textbooks we all use, as one of the co-founders of Economics of Property Rights. I'm very delighted to have Professor Pejovich here, and I'd like to ask him now to approach me to receive the PCPE 2009 Wieser Memorial Prize for Excellence in Economic Education. Please welcome Professor Pejovich. Thank you.
Beautiful, but not well deserved. Well, let me say a few words about. Dean Schwartz said some nice things about me. I have to reciprocate. It was about 20 years ago I came to Prague, and Dean Schwartz took me from his office to the bus stop because I was going to Bratislava. It was the first and the last time in my academic life the university dean hand-carried my luggage from his office to the bus stop. Do you remember? I come from I teach at a very large university, Texas A&M. We have 48,000 students. We are 6th largest school in the United States. But what I wanted to, what many people do not know, is that the 2nd largest ethnic group in Texas are people we call Bohemians. The first are Germans, and then Mexicans. And Texas is different from the rest of the United States. We believe and practice free market. The last year, several million jobs were lost in the United States. In Texas, we created 250,000 jobs last year. We have no state income tax. We have no corporate profit tax. Our Chamber of Commerce recently published a book called The Business Regulations in Texas. This thick book. Each page is empty. Well, they said that if you want to put your audience to sleep, read your paper. My students have different expressions. They say, if you cannot sleep, take economics. It comes to the same. But I promise to those of you who come to my seminars next week, I will not read my lectures. But I have to read this paper because when I started writing it for Professor Shima, I had something simple in my mind. And then the idea grew on me. And I have produced a very long paper that I cannot read entirely, which is in many ways original to anything I have done before. When I say original, I don't say good. God knows. The market will tell me that. But I'm not, I have to guide myself through the paper. Well, let me start by saying that a defining feature of the 20th century was the struggle between capitalism and socialism. Three major incarnations of socialism waged this fight against capitalism. We know them: fascism, National Socialism, and communism. All three types of socialism share the same major premise, which is that their respective visions of a just society should replace the spontaneous order of capitalism. This premise provided fascists, Nazis, and communists with the political justification to replace individual liberties and the rule of man, and the rule of law with the rule of man. Hence, all three types of socialism were unconstrained by law, custom, and morality. Now, they all failed, of course, as we know. Two important lessons of all social experiments from the day one are two. Socialism has repeatedly failed to duplicate the accomplishments of capitalism. And two, socialism refuses to die. Now, the failure of all the different types of socialism has, however, never discouraged the critics of capitalism. Every time one type of socialism has failed, anti-capitalists have been quick to come up with a new one. And there has been no shortage of white knights galloping into town to salvage socialism. Just think of it. Central economic planning of Stalin, self-management of Tito, the Red Guard of Mao, Che banditry crimes in South America, Castro's rape of Cuba, and Gorbachev's perestroika. All had the same objective of making the economic performance of capitalism, of socialism, superior to that of capitalism. And they have all failed to accomplish that objective. At the end of this century, 21st century, socialism is on the march again. Western Europe is in the process, I believe, of transition from social democracy to socialism. Socialist and pro-collectivist parties in Central and Eastern Europe are recovering after the collapse of communism. But in the early 1990s, was supposed to be a transition from socialism to capitalism is slowly turning today into a transition from socialism to socialism. The European Union, unfortunately, but predictably, is helping the transition to socialism by way of numerous regulations supportive of fair trade, there's nothing to do with free trade, wealth redistribution, environmentalism, global warming, and multiculturalism, all of which require government control over the allocation of resources. Given the lesson of history, there is no compelling reason to assume that the new type of socialism that is emerging on the European continent, I call it, and that's the name I invented. I hope, I never heard it before. I like to be inventor at least of something. This type of socialism, I call it liberal socialism, will not, like its predecessors, fail to replicate the economic efficiency of capitalism. My purpose today here is to argue that there is neither theoretical nor empirical evidence basis for expecting the emerging liberal socialism in continental Europe to be able to duplicate the accomplishments of capitalism. I want to explain why. Discussion is restricted to continental Europe. Why? Because I conjecture that as of this writing, continental Europe is the home of liberal socialism. The United Kingdom might be on the road to join the rest of Europe. As for the United States, I believe, I hope the jury is still out. And I want to take a footnote here to say a few words about the Obama administration. The Obama administration is irrelevant to the paper. The Obama administration is using the current economic crisis to open the gates for the importation of liberal socialism into the United States. Obama's first budget and the bunch of his executive orders are not just about spreading the wealth around. They are tailored to change the character of the United States economy along the lines of European social democracies. 3 programs, you watch out in the year to come. There are 3 programs that are going to accomplish that, and none of them has anything to do with bailout or helping to overcome the crisis. One is socialized medicine. The second is federalized education. And the third is government energy policy. All of these programs are not only going to make us into a socialist country, but they are all clearly anti-constitutional. And yet the man who has swore only a few months ago to defend the Constitution is pushing them. Now, the paper has 3 sections. In the first section, I review a few elementary characteristics of private property rights and free exchange. That I'm going to skip here today because I'm going to cover it to a large extent in my lectures on Monday and Tuesday. Monday I talk about property rights, and Tuesday I will talk about exchange and, most importantly, the cause theorem. A second I want to talk, and I will talk today here, is about the meaning and origin and causes of social or liberal socialism. And finally, I want to say a few words about the role of the European Union. Liberal socialism has 2 objectives that set it apart from capitalism. First, the state wants to control the use of resources, to determine who are the winners and who are the losers in the economic game. In the free society, the market determines that. In liberal socialism, like all other socialism, the government wants to do it. Now, the second characteristics that set liberal socialism apart from capitalism is that liberal socialism accepts, it favors collective choice over the rights of individuals. In the French term dirigisme comes to mind here. However, liberal socialism has two characteristics that are totally different from those socialist doctrines we have observed in the past. First, liberal socialism maintains free and democratic elections. All other socialism has been either imposed by force or maintained by force. However, in doing so, it substitutes the will of the majority for the constitutional protection of the rights of individuals. You remember, I'm sure from your classes, a great man, one of the greatest thinkers of the last century, J. Buchanan, used to say over and over again, the term constitution must come before the term democracy. And the second characteristic that set liberal socialism apart from others is that it accepts private property rights. However, it accepts it only conditionally. It attenuates private property rights. Attenuation, what is the term attenuation? Weakening. Attenuation of private property rights in liberal socialism or social democracy that you have in Europe refers to restrictions on three things: on the exclusivity of ownership. Example, the owner of an apartment cannot simply tell a tenant to get lost. Second, on the restrictions on the transferability of ownership, price controls. And third, the legal protection of private property rights. Just try to defend private property rights in Putin's Russia. The attenuation of private property rights weakens the freedom of owners to use their goods in accordance with their subjective preferences. And that, in turn, raises the transaction cost of allocating resources to their highest valued uses. This attenuation of private property rights defines the major philosophical difference between capitalism and liberal socialism. Liberal socialism sees the community as an organic whole group that has a common good. The term common good, I prefer to use more modern term, social justice, is a facade of words hiding redistribution of wealth organized and directed by people who do not own the resources being distributed. I conjecture that the term social justice masks the behavior that is most damaging to the rights of individual and individual liberty. In contrast, the capitalist community is a voluntary association of individuals who enter and leave the community in the pursuit of their own private ends. Now, the act of exchange makes individuals better. Otherwise, why would we do enter into exchange. Every time we enter into exchange, we give up something we value in exchange for something we value more. And this is why we say exchange is a positive-sum game. So exchange moves goods from lower to higher valued uses. By implication, policies that interfere with or reduce the extent of exchange are not efficiency friendly. And that is precisely what liberal socialism does. By interfering with freedom of choice, liberal socialism trades the economic efficiency of voluntary interventions for a set of collective objectives. Now, liberal socialism is suspicious of freedom of choice, not because of any lack of interest in individual liberty, we don't know that, but because individual choices in the free market do not generate output and income distribution consistent with the concept of common good or social justice. To remedy this shortcoming, liberal socialism attenuates, weakens private property rights. Now think about it. Weakening private property rights interferes with voluntary interactions among individuals. And interference with voluntary interactions in open markets means interference with the subjective preferences of interacting individuals. And interference with the subjective preferences of interacting individuals in turn interfere with the flow of goods and services to the highest valued uses. And this is why liberal socialism, on theoretical level, I can argue, fails to duplicate the economic efficiency of capitalism. But I happen to be half Austrian, half Chicago, actually more Chicago than Austrian, but I like both. So I do not take anything unless I can prove it. I believe in empirical test. And I have done it in a very simple way here. I use the index of economic freedom published jointly by the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal, and the economic freedom of the World Index published by Fraser Institute in Canada have established, and notice, have established empirically a strong positive correlation between economic freedom and economic growth, per capita growth. To measure economic freedom, both indexes use categories that are consistent with institutional policies supportive of economic efficiency. By implication, it is to say that the country has become, that as country becomes freer, it grows more, it becomes more productive. Those both indexes, I'm not going to give you, it's in the paper, have been tested on theoretical and empirical grounds by scholars both in Europe and the United States. They have problems, but they are the best we have. For the present purpose, I use the Index of Economic Freedom published by the Heritage. I like it. That's the only reason. The index uses 10 categories, and please now, let me be very specific. The index uses 10 categories to measure economic freedom. 3 categories that I find most important for the purpose of my paper, because they affect private property rights, are the property rights, business freedom, and labor freedom. Property rights, the index defines property rights category as the legal protection of property rights, in terms of legal protection. Business freedom is primarily about individuals' right to create, operate, and close an enterprise without interference from the state. Labor freedom means free labor markets. that I can employ with my workers, that I'm free from the pressure from unions, whatever. Now, there are critical differences between these three categories, which makes index a little bit weaker than I wish it were. The first one, property rights, measures the protection of the bundle of property rights without specifying the content of the bundle of rights that is being protected. The second and third category, business freedom and labor freedom, they specify the bundle of rights that needs to be protected. Now, the backbone of American, what we call Anglo-American capitalism, the backbone of the Anglo-American law, better said, is that the primary function, the primary, almost exclusive function by tradition of private property rights is to serve the subjective preferences of property owners. Those preferences create incentives leading to efficiency-friendly behavior. On the other hand, the political and legal tradition of Western Europe, not including United Kingdom and Ireland, which are common law countries, has constrained the function of private property rights from serving the subjective preferences of owners. Let me give you examples, very important examples. In many West European countries, the owner of an apartment cannot simply ask a tenant to vacate the place within a customary period. It is a problem. You cannot tell, this is my apartment, I want it back. Give you a quick example in the United States. There was a building that was used by all people as their home. They were renting rooms there. The owner wanted to change that into a parking lot. It was more profitable. He gave notices to all people to vacate. Many people on the left are saying, look, you have no heart. Maybe. It's for you to decide whether he had heart or not. But the point is that he had right to do it, and nobody could have stopped it, and he did it. Now, in Germany, German law explicitly, constitution actually, protects private property rights only as long as they serve human dignity and welfare programs. The owner of a business in Spain is reluctant to hire workers because the cost of hiring them are too high. In France, the owner has to pay a tax penalty in order to close down an establishment. My son is vice president of a huge company, Whirlpool. They make washing machines, refrigerators. They have a company in France. He said, Father, we'll be losing money there. It's simply less costly to continue losing money than to close it down. And he said, how could it be? A naive American. That's our firm. Well, the Italian legal system protects private rights only insofar as they serve a social function as defined by the state. Now, the tradition of the rule of law in Western Europe, then, there is a tradition of the rule of law in Western Europe. And that tradition will predict what, in terms of what I've said? It will predict that the protection of property rights is very high. Whatever the property rights are, they are going to be protected. However, the tradition of social democracy will also predict that business freedom and labor freedom are not well protected. And now, if you turn this, Mr. Shima, indeed, the index for Germany shows a high score for property rights category, 90 out of 100. And the score for labor freedom, 43 out of 100. Even though both categories are about property rights. The former defines the protection of property rights, and the latter defines the bundles of property rights being protected. Look at just this. According to the Heritage Index, The United States and Germany have the same grade of 90 out of 100 for the property rights category. And yet, the bundle of rights that is being protected in the United States is not the same as in Germany. And if the bundle of rights is not the same, the incentives are not the same. And if incentives are not the same, economic outcome cannot be the same. So that is a sort of a weakness of property rights. Now, what I have done is, in Central and Eastern Europe, the social forces affecting the property rights are different from those in Western Europe. Except for lingering memories of the rule of law in the parts of Central and Eastern Europe that belong to the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, the years of socialist rule have completely destroyed confidence in the legal system. Instead, what is the meaning of law? What is the purpose of law? Is to protect you from the state. But instead of doing that, your experience, your parents' experience, your grandparents' experience in Czechoslovakia or Eastern Europe was what? That the state was making laws to do what the state wanted to do to you. Thus, the law is taken no more seriously than the promises the young boy makes to young girls when they park the car. And the prevailing culture in Central and Eastern Europe is not homogeneous, but it has a common bias toward collectivism, egalitarianism, and shared values. And those values predate communism. Why do we have that heterogeneous culture? And how does it affect the rise of socialism? Well, the culture is heterogeneous because of historical influence of 3 empires and 3 religions: Austro-Hungarian, Russian, and Ottoman empires, and 3 religions: Catholic, Orthodox, and Islam. Now, what I did, I simply I took as a benchmark the 5 freest countries in the Heritage Index. All of them are common law countries. The freest countries are Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, United States, and Canada. And then I divided Central and East European countries into 2 parts. Those 9 countries that were influenced by the Western culture more, and those that were not subject to some influence. And what do we observe? We indeed observe that the effect of liberal socialism, the effect on private property rights, are qualitatively different in Western Europe than in Central and Eastern Europe. We also observe that differences exist between countries in Eastern Europe that were subject and those that were not subject to Western influence. Now, let me say a few words and I finish about European Union. The issue that affects all member countries is that European Union has added one more layer of bureaucracy to those already existing in your own countries. And like all bureaucracies, East European bureaucracy has strong incentives to grow. Some regulations enacted by European Union are undoubtedly pro-free market, while others are not. However, the distribution of pro-free market and anti-free market regulations is not as important as it exists now. It's not as important for judging the direction of economic changes as the power of the Brussels bureaucracy to issue and enforce regulations. And it is this regulatory power of the Brussels bureaucracy that, if I was a citizen here, I could not and would not trust. Now, Professor Epstein, a very leading legal and economic mind in the United States, understood the problem and formulated his impressions of the direction of the European Union. He was speaking about the Constitution just before it failed. He said the proposed EU Constitution allows for such dominance of the center that it will make a potential miracle for that competition to play a powerful role in the affair of the European Union. By giving rights with one hand and taking them away with the other, the proposed constitution lacks any clear definition and structure. But when the dust settles, there will be more government and less freedom for all. Václav Klaus, your president, and probably the most popular East European leader in the United States, and especially in Texas. 2 years ago, he came to speak in Texas, and I had the privilege to be asked to introduce him. At the same time, Greenspan spoke in the same hotel. For Klaus, where Klaus spoke, there were only standing room. Greenspan's room were half empty. And that's true. Klaus has frequently spoken and written about the way Brussels has hijacked the great idea of creating a united Europe based on free trade and individual liberties. There is nothing wrong with the EU. What's wrong is Brussels. Very recently, 2 months ago, actually, he said the following to an audience. And he was booed down, I'm told. The ongoing weakening of democracy and of free markets on the European continent, connected with the European unification process, is a threatening phenomenon. It was the main building block of the European Constitution, and it remains without substantial change in the new version of the Lisbon Treaty. Klaus is right. When the proposed constitution was voted down, Brussels started re-emphasizing the Lisbon Treaty. Now that the Lisbon Treaty is not working out either, there is a talk of doing something else in order to get things right. We observed every time a country votes down a preferred EU rule or proposition, Brussels tries to engineer another election, and then another, until the rule wins a majority. Once that happens, another election is never called. Professor O'Hare, a British professor of good standing, wrote that one important consequence of Brussels' hunger for power is that the enterprise to which the United European Union is committed is first and foremost the creation of itself as a super-governmental authority, a task, he said, of Hegelian proportions and Sovietic pretensions. Let me now say the story of European Union is the story of an unstoppable drive to replace local laws with Europe-wide rules leading to centralization of power in Brussels. And in the process of centralizing power in Brussels, the EU has been supporting the development of liberal socialism in Europe. In conclusion, and I have at the end of the paper, it's available on the, I believe, on the website. I have 3 appendixes that shows the amount of time, unbelievable amount of time and resources that European Union spent on trying to decide how to treat pigs. I'm serious, pigs at the farms. And there is even argument with some British guy that you people were arguing that pigs should be given toys, because if they don't have toys, they might be bored and commit suicide. You read that. So, in conclusion, my analysis, I hope, shows that the major reason for the rise of liberal socialism lies in its success, basic success, in eroding the two key institutions of capitalism: private property rights and the freedom of exchange. Unlike communism, which used brute force to replace private property rights with state ownership and economic planning, liberal socialism is bribing people to accept voluntarily the erosion of those two key capitalist institutions, private property and freedom of contract, and relies on free elections to validate the resulting institutional changes. The term bribing I use refers to government policies that are spreading the wealth around, to quote our President Obama, the savior, creating entitlement programs, supporting labor unions, promoting fair trade, and enacting legal restrictions on hiring and firing employees of private business firms. The common objective of those and similar policies is to lower the cost of the emergence of liberal socialism by replacing the capitalist culture, the culture of independence based on self-responsibility and self-determination in competitive markets, with a culture of dependence on the state. I end simply by saying I conjecture that the emergence and survival of liberal socialism depends, and here I quote again Professor Jim Buchanan, in a beautiful paper, one of his best, depends, as Buchanan argued, on whether those policies succeed in making individuals afraid to be free. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Pejovich, for your nice talk. And I'm glad you mentioned Richard Epstein, the leading scholar in the field of classical liberal legal theory. I actually can already announce him, Richard Epstein, as 2010 PCPE Wieser Memorial Prize recipient. Richard Epstein is coming to Prague. He'll be available for students of this university. He'll teach a course here, and we are about to publish a book by him, which will be translated over the summer. So that's an invitation and to the next year conference. However, that's 1 year ahead. We are only at the end of the very first day of the conference. So let me make a few concluding remarks or closing remarks. I want, for the benefit mostly of the Czech audience, to mention a few new books which got published very recently. The first is a classic in libertarian thought or libertarian scholarship, Mary Rothbard's book, Ethics of Liberty, now in Czech, with a lengthy introduction of Professor Hans-Hermann Hoppe. So please, all Czech followers of the libertarian scholarship, I guess that's the book you have to have. And the second book, which now becomes available to the Slovak readers, is a book by Professor Hoppe called Democracy, Anarchy, and Errors of Economics, which is a collection of articles by Professor Hoppe dealing with economic method, but also his comparative political system stuff. That means his articles about comparing democratic and monarchical rulers. There is a very nice article about the errors of the theory of public goods, which I guess needs to be widely read, especially by students of our faculty, by the way, who study public administration, so that you do not only take what is accepted as granted pretty much today, but some very challenging thought by Professor Hoppe and a couple of other articles. So once again, if you want to have Austrian libertarian book which can actually explain a lot of which has not been yet explained properly in Czech language, this is the book you should buy and have a look at. I want to make sure at the very end of this my little talk now that everybody understands where to go during these 2 coming days. Tomorrow, the panel session will be here, right here in this building. The program starts at 8:30. However, starting at 8 o'clock, there will be a little refreshment, coffee, pastries, so you can have a light breakfast here before the sessions. The sessions will be in 2 or 3 rooms, depending on the number of sessions throughout the day. There are still some lunches available, so please stop at the registration desk to get a lunch coupon. And actually, even today's dinner's coupon, there are few left. So if you want to continue with informal discussions, and I guess this conference is also about informal discussion, if not mostly about informal discussion, because we want to have this platform, meeting room for people in the Austrian tradition to discuss things. Make sure you get the voucher and then can spend the whole evening with people from the group. And the Sunday program is outside the university. Please consult your handbook. There are maps, there are directions. So everything important is in the handbook. I have to mention it now because that's the last time where the whole group is together. If anything happens, if you get lost anywhere, there is my cell phone in the handbook. So feel free to, call me up and I'll send police to find you somewhere and report you to the conference place. I hope that will not happen, but in case it does, everything, always bring your conference handbook with you. Yeah, I guess this is it for today. The dinner starting at 7 o'clock in downtown Prague. Directions in the handbook. I hope that you'll join us, and I hope these 2 coming days will be very productive. So I wish you luck, and we'll have a lot of time to talk. So have a nice evening, and thank you for coming.